Could Tiny Epic Kingdoms, a game that looks like a couple of cards, be more of a 4X than TI4, a game that looks like this?
No. Who banned? I started. Ashton did it too.
I loved Sid Meier's Civilization Revolution growing up, and I wanted that experience in person with my friends. So then I found out what a 4X board game really is, and it is a lot of stuff. But over the years, I found some weirdness going on with this genre. Can this game be more of a 4X than this game without much grand strategy? Why are some games claiming to be a 4X but not really performing like a Civ builder? There's a lot to cover here, guys. We're back to our series of breaking down popular board game mechanics to show more to them that you maybe haven't seen. We're getting to the roots of 4X's gravitas with tons of examples throughout different types of game sizes, what people like about 4X, some barriers to it, and of course, how the word 4X became a vibe. We got a lot of games here to reference, so we're going to be putting on the bottom left corner the names of the games we're showing. So now let's get to the definition. We're going to be going off the BGG definition for 4X, which I swear wasn't here about a year ago, but nice, we finally have a solid source for it. 4X is a family of games which link together the 4X's that are all crucial parts of the game. Players typically start from near nothing to progress what is typically some sort of empire to be bigger and stronger throughout the game. To break down the X's, first you explore, where you reveal info on land outside your home base, typically lifting a type of fog of war as you reveal information. Next you expand, claiming land, like moving pieces across the map, can be militarily or economically. In Civilization, a good instance of expanding is building another city. Then you exploit, which means you use the places you've expanded to, like using a city that you previously constructed to gain more resources now, look at all that income. And you can use such income to improve aspects of yourself. Lastly, there's exterminate, which means you crush your enemies and see them driven before you. Really, there's usually incentives to kill your enemy hard in some way, but it only has to be possible to wipe someone. This doesn't have to happen all the time. From this four-pronged definition alone, it's pretty clear that 4X is a serious genre. In fact, a lot of articles I read online define it as being for hardcore players. So then what's the big appeal? Why did 4X capture my heart and many other people's hearts who want it on a table? Well, first, 4X's capture a feeling of huge progression. You start with almost nothing, with the game wide open in front of you, usually resulting in a different game every time as you move differently on random maps. This gets compounded with tons of initial or emergent asymmetry, because there's lots of ways to modify the act of exploring, expanding, exploiting, etc., that in of themselves can have varying levels of complexity. Like think of upgrade paths, for example. With asymmetry plus complexity, it lends even further to the simulation that you are a cool civilization builder, almost like a king or emperor per se.
I'm going towards next. What are
Wait.
you doing?
That is so good.
Then with civilizations or nations being built up, there will be tons of conflict. There's pretty much guaranteed interaction as the game ramps up with everyone expanding, usually towards each other. Some games will even have a way to micro your military, aka do a separate military minigame, and this procedure means more because you've invested precious resources into said units. Nothing is a throwaway. It's all connected to your grand nation's plan of coming out on top. In multiplayer, politics can typically play a big role in conflict, as you try to self-balance maps and asymmetrical differences. See Civilization's popular trade menu and Gandhi refusing to ally with you.
Having a weapon is very different from actually using it.
Lastly, there's usually multiple win conditions, and if not these conditions, then there's varied ways to get points to put a bow on top of all the player expression. AKA, you can usually decide to be more on the peaceful side and play politics and try to win through that, or be super violent and aggressive and try to win. If you're overly enthusiastic like me, and you're thinking that, since the video game is like top down with a map, well then can't we just make that a board game because it's also in turns? But with digital to physical, I've noticed 5 barriers that are really putting the burden on us human beings playing this game. One is learning friction. No longer can the on-screen UI tell you where you can or can't play, and there's no very easy, dumb robot enemies to practice on who may not even attack you. Remember, 4X's inherently have many aspects to them, and newcomers will get blasted by veterans on game night because it's a system that rewards high conflict. 2 is component overload. With complexity comes tons of components, meaning that the game can be a pain to set up and take down, and further runs the risk of being fiddly. Think of how religion in Civilization, which is something automatic, is now getting tons of separate tokens and spending them generated from each city. See Galactic Era, a game about secretly hiding your fleet strength, which would be no problem for a video game, but in a board game requires annoying stacking of tiny poker chips. Barrier 3 is time, which does get increasingly stressed from the learning friction and component overload. Even for veterans who set up the game beforehand, more table talk leads to longer turns, and it's it's no surprise how people have to reserve half a day to play Prophecy of Kings TI4 6-player. Like 6 people around one table for so much continuous time isn't the easiest to do as opposed to a start and stop video game. Plus, there's always the risk that the game night takes longer than you anticipated because many 4Xs don't have set end times. If you don't finish, there's no save button available. That thing is on your table or in your table for many months in the case of me. Then the fourth not so obvious barrier I've noticed is that this high conflict nature of 4Xs might not actually work for you in real life. There's a big difference between the person who just like to play Civ to upgrade all the technologies and ally with their friends against the robots, and playing Civ the board game, where everyone is hungrily exploiting every weakness of another person like a starving hyena. Board game 4Xs tend to be more accelerated because they need to finish in shorter turns, and so it is possible to get effectively eliminated through the brutality, and since these board games are still long events, you can just sit there and do nothing. Plus, if you're the real competitive type, well, you might want time to practice, and as we said before, there's no training room, there's no robots or even people online to play board game with easily. Although this is easier now than before with many online communities popping up. And you can't fully enjoy 4Xs at the popular accessible board game player count of 2 players. Okay, so you technically can. A lot of these games, actually all these games in front of me say they're valid at 2 players. But remember how we said diplomacy is such a big part of 4Xs? Like think about when you play Civ, it's usually not a 1v1. There's gonna be at least some bots thrown in. So not only do lots of mechanics get thrown out in 2-player, see these useless diplomacy cards in this game, but also outcomes in 2-player are really victim to if one person happens to luck into good RNG early, they can typically just snowball that luck into a win. It's really the case here because the 4Xs were designed to have other players gang up on those who get something like Hanging Gardens as a starting wonder so that they can keep spawning units for free every round. That is so amazing early game. Okay, so what we're left with is people want the 4X experience, but they don't necessarily have the time or perfect friend group to do it. So then there must be an influx of fast accessible games to solve this problem, right? Kind of. It's really hard to streamline a genre that's so inherently grand. Tiny Epic Kingdoms is a 30-minute 4X that is kind of an oxymoron of an idea. It's really continually skirting around its time limitation. It doesn't really do exterminate that much because it's so short. It's really hard to exterminate someone with all players sharing a limited set of actions every round. Tiny Epic barely does exploit because all you're doing is siphoning 1 resource from where you're on. This goes up to 2 at best. Then the moment you research your VP giving faction upgrade, the game immediately ends. And the exploration isn't the standard game. It's understandably via an optional variant, because I'm sure the designer realized there just isn't enough time to balance out super weak or strong explorations. This really plays more like an area control with some Euro-isms that was pushing too hard to be labeled a 4X, and this is, in my opinion, far from epic. Or the supposedly true 4X that we reviewed last year that funnily enough feels closer to just a Euro than a 4X, because the main focus is to just race 20 victory points. You just can't really eliminate others before someone sprints to get 20 victory points. The game's over already. Remember, in these short 4Xs, since they're so short, it can be hard to attack someone who ends up getting ahead on their faction nuance or good map flips, so it can feed more into the feeling of just draw best and win the game. As said during the definition, a big part of how the 4X gameplay loop is satisfying is because you feel like every aspect matters. But with an hour or so of game time, meaning not that many rounds, the game might end before any of the 4Xs can go really deep, or a lot of these aspects are pretty much cut. Here's the popular Euro, Scythe, that claims to be a 4X. Gosh, I hate that the online client says 4X. But Scythe doesn't have true extermination or exploration. If you play Scythe anything like you play any traditional 4X, you'd find yourself in massive confusion. Here's a definition that hit too close to home. TI4 actually isn't a 4X. Yep, that's right. If you play without the Prophecy of Kings expansion, there's no exploration of new planets or the tech to explore face down tokens on the map. Hence comes the term 3X or 3.5X to label games that are flirting with the idea of a 4X but don't quite hit all the X's. But this term is confusing in of itself because BGG defines a 3.5X as something that is like a 4X but forgoes the elimination aspect. But many 3.5Xs forgo exploration because that's just easier to take out of the game. I've definitely heard for convenience, well, this game is basically a 4X. Which slowly morphs into, oh yeah, it's a 4X. The game of telephone is real, people. So that's how 4X became a vibe. You have games claiming they're 4Xs or true 4Xs, but then they're really not by the elaborate traditional definition of a 4X, which just makes things confusing. From the publisher angle, I suspect it's really easy to hide behind the 4X definition because you can easily smoke and mirror your definition behind 4 different categories. And some people don't even know what 4X even stands for, they just know it sounds epic, right? For the player angle, I suspect that people think they want a 4X when thinking of playing Civ against bots, but maybe what they're looking for in a board game is a city builder with some interaction that isn't fighting each other, or they want to exploit hexes with player interaction like Takenoko, or they want a highly diplomatic, asymmetrical area control like Root or Rising Sun. And there's nothing wrong with these preferences, it's just that you need to know you don't want a 4X here. I get it, especially with the word 4X being so easy to say. This game's a 4X, that game's a 4X. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. Heck, I've called TI3 and TI4 a 4X plenty of times, and they're technically not. I misled people. Screw me. At the end of the day, definitions for things are constantly changing, updated by new gaming practices and new games that come out. 4X has typically been a niche video game genre compared to platformers and shooters, and the fact that a sliver of it is getting more accessible through board games means that more people are getting access to a morsel of these experiences who would otherwise casually load up some Europa Universalis. God, this game is crazy. I just don't want someone that is used to playing Endless Space 2 hear that Last Light is a popular true 4X game and have a heart attack when realizing what the game is. That was a video I've been stewing on for a long time. Let me know if there's any 4Xs or 3.5Xs I haven't mentioned. I tried to have a pretty wide variety of games, but due to their heavier, complex nature, and they take a long time, I just can't cover as many examples as I want. Also, funnily enough, while also not board game related, I thought Age of Empires and StarCraft 2 were 4Xs, but technically because they're RTSs and not turn-based, they don't fall under the definition of 4X. Yeah, crazy stuff. Anyways, thank you to our patrons over here for making videos like this possible. Whew, so much stuff coming. I don't know when this video is gonna get released, but it was so fun to make. Couldn't have been possible without playing all these games. So again, thank you guys for supporting me so I can continue getting all this knowledge from these different types of games and making videos like this. We also got our Mad As a Cardboard over here. That's it. How 4X became a vibe. See you guys later. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Bye-bye.